big deal. All right, so here we go. Doesn't matter to me. How was your week, Barbie?
Wonderful.
I guess 2 weeks since we didn't see you.
I'm sorry I could have done that.
Could have been done before Shabbat.
That link that you gave for the live feed from Israel for yesterday, awesome.
Yeah, it's been every week. I mean,
I guess I just don't see it.
yeah.
So it is every week because
Well, it's every week this summer, but every time they've done it this whole year, which at the beginning of the year was every week because of COVID, they did it every week. But then they went back to their once a month pattern. They do it every week in the summer. I've put it on the calendar and advertised it every single time.
I don't see a lot of things like
Yeah.
this because there's so much that I think
Yeah, yeah. Ruth got Katie. She's amazing. She's a rabbi.
I was busy cutting up fruit salad. My cell phone couldn't take the feed, so I used my laptop. It was such a nice way to be getting into the mood.
I love it. I love it. Yeah, so when we go to Israel as a congregation, hopefully next year or a year, 2 years,
22 or 23?
23, I think. June 23. It will be the 75th year of Israel. So 23. When we go, one of the things we'll do is go to Friday night services there. Or that will be an option. We used to go all the time, Rachel and me, when we lived in Jerusalem. We lived right next to the top tower of Shabbat, the first train station where it happens.
I've only been once.
So it's time to go again.
More than time to go again. Stan and I had actually decided we were going to hit it one more time before he would be able to, and it was canceled. The trip was canceled, so I don't think I was really sorry because he was becoming more physically demanding.
Yeah.
But I had always hoped to go.
Yeah, so we'll go.
And I
We'll go.
have a cousin who said, if you ever go back to Israel, let me know. I'd like to go. She has never been.
She should come on our trip.
Yeah.
Yeah, our congregational trip, it's a congregational trip, but it'll be open to anybody's families.
I would hope so.
Yeah.
And she used to be a tour guide in Boston. So she lives in Concord.
Yeah, I know it well.
Okay, well, thank you.
Yeah. Do you want to sit closer for the teaching part so I don't feel like I'm shouting from the back of the room?
You don't have to shout from the back of the room. I'll be happy to sit closer.
Great. Shabbat Shalom. and welcome to Congregation Agudat Achim's in-person and live stream Shabbat morning service. We are joining together for our final L'chu Nerananah program of the year. L'chu Nerananah is the name we gave to our Shabbat morning before services programming. The words L'chu Nerananah means, come, let us sing together, let us praise God together, let us join together in joy. And we've been doing every other month a deep dive into some part of the text of the service, and every other month we've been doing an extended musical Psukei de Zimra. So today is June 19th, and we are doing our Iyun Tfilah, our deep dive into a section of the service. So let me start by reviewing where we've been this year, what we've done. We started by thinking about the structure of the service altogether. That the service on Shabbat morning and on many mornings of the week, we have the Psukei de Zimra, the morning blessings, the songs of praise, which are like a warm-up to the service. Then we have the Kriyat Shema and its blessings, the recitation of the Shema. That's our daily Torah study, and we do the Kriyat Shema both morning and evening. That is to say, at Shacharit, our morning service, and at Mariv, our evening service, because it says in the Shema that you should say these words morning and night. So we make sure to say these words morning and night, and it's our Torah study portion of the service. It's interesting, right? We think about prayers as being different from Torah study, but in fact, Torah study and prayer are deeply intertwined in the Jewish tradition. One of my teachers framed it this way: prayer is human beings talking to God, and study is God talking to human beings. It's a nice way to think about it, but I've found that it's actually more complex than that. Sometimes in prayer, I open my heart up to hearing God's words within me, in my soul, what is resonant. And I find that in prayer, it's sometimes easier to feel the presence of God than in study. And I find that in study, sometimes I'm trying to understand God. Like I am reaching out and speaking to God in my study. And so, what? I don't think she has undies. She does? Well, if the... Oh, you mean the stand? Got it. Okay. There you go. I find that it's a more complicated relationship between prayer and study. Okay, you can do it. So a part of our prayer service is study of Torah and the surrounding blessings that are contained. Then we have the Amidah, the standing prayer, which is the pinnacle. You can see on my hand, that's the highest finger, the pinnacle, the mountaintop of prayer. And in fact, the rabbis call the Amidah Hatfilah, the prayer. Right? The word Amidah that we use to describe that prayer, the standing prayer, that's actually a later innovation. In the Talmudic period, they just called that Hatfilah, the prayer, because that was the most important prayer. And what makes a service in Judaism is whether it contains an Amidah. So the Musaf service is a service. The Torah service is actually just part of Shacharit. The Torah service, where we call it a Torah service, but really it is the end of Shacharit as we study Torah together. What makes a service is the presence of an Amidah. Shacharit, Mincha, and Mariv, our morning, afternoon, and evening prayers all have an Amidah. The Musaf has an Amidah. And one day a year on Yom Kippur, we have 5 Amidot: Mariv, Shacharit, Musaf, Mincha, and Ne'ilah, the special prayer for Yom Kippur, the special closing of the gates prayer. So each of those has an Amidah. So one day a year we do five prayers. So that's the Amidah, the standing prayer, and the holiest part of the standing prayer is called the Kiddushah, the holiness prayer. And that's the moment where we reenact or re-envision standing in God's courtroom with all the angels present, and we stand with our feet together because we believe that angels have only one foot. And so we stand with our feet together and we rise up like the angels do as they're singing to God in the heavenly court, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts." And so we say also those words. And that's the Amidah. Then we have the sort of ramp down, the descent down the mountain of prayer. And again, the pointer finger here in this image, the pointer finger is Torah study. So we have Torah study on the ring side, that's the Shema and its blessings, and Torah study on the pointer side, which is taking the Torah out of the ark and reading it from the scroll. And indeed, we study Torah 3 mornings a week and 1 afternoon a week, twice on Saturday and Monday and Thursday morning, and then also on holidays. And then finally, the thumb is the wrap-up of the service, the concluding prayers, and it balances out the Psukei de Zimra, the morning prayers. So where the service begins with blessings and verses of praise that describe the universality of God's being in the world. Like a lot of the psalms that we say in Psukei de Zimra are about God's creation of the entire world, of the entire universe, about God's presence in creation. That is a universal message. When we get to the end of the service, we again play on this idea of universalism and particularism, and the end of the service talks in some ways about our particular mission as the Jewish people, and what does that mission have to do with our universal mission? That is to say, we are a particular people with, in some ways, a message about creating a holy space for the whole world. So over the course of this year, this is our final meeting of the year, of our learning cycle this year. Over the course of the year, we looked at Psalm 30 from Psukei de Zimra. We looked at the blessings of Kriyat Shema, specifically the Yotzer blessing. We looked at some parts of the Amidah. We looked at some parts of the Torah service, and we're now going to, or Musaf, I think we did. Yeah, that's what we did. We did Musaf for Shabbat, and now we're going to look at the Aleinu, which is the prayer of the conclusion part of the service, which we do at every service. At every service that we do, there's an Aleinu. Aleinu is part of our wrap-up. So you can find Aleinu in many different parts of the Siddur, but we'll go to the page that is the Shabbat morning Aleinu, page 510. Now, what is Aleinu originally? Aleinu is, in fact, the introduction to the Rosh Hashanah Amidah, the Rosh Hashanah Amidah, the Musaf Amidah for Rosh Hashanah has 3 unique sections that only occur in the Amidah for Rosh Hashanah. And those are Malchuyot, Zichronot, and Shofarot. A special blessing about God's kingship, a special blessing about God's capacity for remembering, and a special blessing for the sounding of the shofar. So those three sections of the Musaf Amidah for Rosh Hashanah each have the same structure. And the structure is this. There is an introduction paragraph, and then there are 10 verses from Scripture, from the Tanakh, and then there is a concluding paragraph. So each of those 3 sections has that same structure. Introductory paragraph, 10 verses, closing paragraph. And the 10 verses also have a structure. There are 3 verses from Torah, 3 verses from writings, 3 verses from prophets, and then 1 more verse from Torah. And so we have, well, I guess it's 1 more verse. Sometimes it comes from Torah and sometimes from other places. No, I think it's always from Torah. So we have, the 10 verses also have a structure. And so Aleinu was actually composed, was written to be the introductory paragraph to the kingship section of the service, of the kingship section of the Musaf Amidah for Rosh Hashanah. The rabbis loved this passage so much that they took it out of context, out of its place in the Rosh Hashanah Amidah, and you know that the Aleinu is from there because you can remember that on Rosh Hashanah we sing it to its big tune, and we call it there the Aleinu Hagadol, the great Aleinu, and we sing it like Aleinu L'Shabeach L'Adon HaKol L'Ateint Gedula L'Yotze Bereshit Shelo Asanu Kegoye Haratzot Velo Samanu Kemishbechot Hadama Shelo Sam Chelkeinu Kahem Vigoraleinu Kecho Hamonam. And on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, when we get to that great Aleinu, it's traditional for everybody to do a full prostration. Vanachnu, we say Vanachnu. Then we go down onto our knees, all the way onto our knees. Korimu mishtachavim, and we straighten out complete prostration. And as I say every year on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, everybody is supposed to do this. This is a tradition which is an invitation for everybody to, if they're physically able, to spread out and to get on their faces in full prostration. Now, Jewish tradition, we don't prostrate ourselves very much. Just that once a year, pretty much. And I think that it's a really important spiritual moment. If you've never done it, maybe this Rosh Hashanah is a time to try it. So that's where Aleinu comes from. The rabbis liked Aleinu so much, and it was so meaningful to them, that they ordained that we should say Aleinu at the end of every prayer service as part of our concluding prayers. So, a prayer, there are a lot of prayers that we only say on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, or prayers that we just say on Rosh Hashanah. And when we get to them, they feel different. They feel unusual. They feel like it takes a little while to get into, these prayers, I remember them from last year. They're a little different from our regular everyday prayers. Aleinu could have been like that. It could have been just another prayer that we only say once on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. But instead, the rabbis ordained that we would say it at the end of every prayer service, 3 times a day, every day. So what made this prayer so significant, so important? To understand that, we're going to have to read through it. We'll read through it in English. I brought a couple of different books so that we can do some comparative translation, because I think that it helps to understand what the Hebrew is saying, to be able to do some comparative translation. Yes. Yeah, you can follow along in that book. Yeah, that's the right way. All right. So, we're going to start on page 511. Aleinu l'shabeach la'adon hakol. It says here, we rise to our duty to praise the Lord of all. We rise to our duty to praise the Lord of all. Okay, so that's the Sidur Sim Shalom. Then we have from our most recent Sidur of the conservative movement, the Sidur Lev Shalem, which I'm hoping we will adopt and use in our community. It says, "It is for us to praise the ruler of all." Okay? Aleinu, it is upon us. It is our responsibility. Lishabeach, to praise. Adon Hakol, the Lord of all, the ruler of all. So, and I'm also going to share the translation of Aleinu from the Koren Sachs Sidur, which is a recent Orthodox Sidur. And there it says, "It is our duty to praise the Master of all." It is our duty. Great. Latet gedula liotzer breshit. The second line is poetic parallelism to the first line. Latet gedula, to give acclaim, to share the greatness. Liotzer breshit, of the one who created everything. So here it says in the Orthodox Sidur, and ascribe greatness to the author of creation. In Sidur Sim Shalom it says, to acclaim the Creator, and which is also what it says here in Lev Shalem. Shalo asanu ki goyei ha'aratzot. God made our lot unlike that of other people. So already there you can see what I mean by this is a prayer of Jewish particularism. It is our duty, ours, the Jewish people. It is upon us specifically, not the whole entire world, but us, right? And we're saying that God treats the Jewish people. God has a different plan for us. Our lot is unlike that of other people. So in Lev Shalem it says, "Who has not made us merely a nation." Who has not made us merely a nation. Here in the Koren Sidur, who has not made us like the nations of the lands. V'lo samanu k'mishbechot ha'adama. So again, the first two lines were poetic parallelism. Aleinu l'shabeach ladon hakol latet gedula liotzer breshit. So those phrases are parallel. They mean the same thing. The next two phrases are also parallel. Shalo asanu ki goyei ha'aratzot, God did not make us like the other nations. V'lo samanu k'mishbechot hadama, nor did God make us like the other families of the earth, nor formed us as all earthly families, says Lev Shalem. Assigning to us a unique destiny, says this. Shalo sam chalkenu kahem v'goralenu k'chol hamonam. Actually, the Sidur Sim Shalom seems to have cut out some of the poetry and just translated the phrase once. God made our lot unlike that of other people is how they're translating both Shalo asanu ki goyei ha'aratzot and V'lo samanu k'mishbechot ha'adama. They just made those parallel phrases that mean the same thing, they made them into one phrase. So this is part of the reason why I don't love the translation in our Sidur Sim Shalom. Jules Harlow, who wrote this translation, often didn't feel like it was his job to translate the words of the Hebrew. He felt like it was his job to write something that meant something in English. But I think that's very hard for us who are trying to pray and understand the words that we're saying. The Koren Siddur says, nor placed us like the families of the earth, very similar to what we have in Lev Shalem. All right, so we're 4 lines in. Shalo sam chalkeinu kahem v'goralenu kechol hamonam. Who nor given us an ordinary destiny. Nor given us an ordinary destiny. Or here, assigning to us a unique destiny. Or here, nor our destiny like the other multitudes. Who has not made our portion like theirs, nor our destiny like the other multitudes. Okay. Now, there's a line that is in the Orthodox Siddur that has been removed from our Siddur. And it was removed from our Siddur in the medieval Europe because it was actually removed from all Siddurim in medieval Europe because this line, the Christian hegemony in Europe was offended by this line, and their censors required that Jews remove it from their prayer book. And the line is, Shehem mishtachavim lahevel varik umitpalalim el lo Yoshia, for they, that is the other nations, not the Jewish nation, but the other nations, they worship vanity and emptiness and pray to a God who cannot save. And the Christians felt like this was a direct attack on their God, on Jesus. Jesus' name literally means Savior, right? Jesus comes from the word Yehoshua, Yeshua, salvation. And that's the same word here, El lo Yoshia. They felt like this sentence was a direct attack on Jesus as a Savior, that Jesus cannot save, that there's no salvation from other religions. So it was taken out of Siddurim, and there was a tradition of people saying it anyway, but you had to know it by heart. You didn't say it because it wasn't in the Siddur. You just had to know to say it. And when in the United States of America people started writing prayer books for ourselves in the land of the free, where there weren't this kind of Christian censorship of our books, some people put it back in. And some people said, well, maybe we don't need to say in our concluding prayer that other gods, other religions, or the other peoples who are praying to other religions, that they lack salvation, that their prayers are not going anywhere, that they're worshiping just emptiness and vanity. So I will say, I'm a traditionalist. I really like using the words, the traditional words, and then reinterpreting them for our modern times. And so for me, Hem mishtachavim lahevel varik, they worship vanity and emptiness. To me, the they there, I understand that in context, it is referring to the other families of the earth, as opposed to the Jewish family. But to me, it is the danger of all religion that instead of worshiping God, we use the trappings of religion to worship ourselves, or to worship money, or to worship power, or to worship other idols that are vanity and emptiness. To me, saying it is upon us, that is true believers, it is on us, people who are really trying to be in relationship with God and in relationship with God through the lens of Judaism, to be wary of the danger that even Judaism can be sometimes worshiping vanity and emptiness. So to me, there's a way to take that line. It doesn't, just because the Christians thought it was referring specifically to Jesus, doesn't mean that we have to think of it that way if we were to say it. So I actually like the idea of putting it back in. On the other hand, I'm also sympathetic to this idea, why should we define our relationship to God in the negative? Oh yeah, our relationship to God is not vanity and emptiness. But I do think that it's important to note that that line used to be there, even if we take it out, because, like I said, we could very easily fall into the trap of worshiping vanity and nothingness, even within the strictures of Jewish teachings. And so I think we have to protect ourselves from that danger, the danger of being seduced by wealth or power or the trappings of religiosity, right? Religion is supposed to make us better people. And if it's not doing that, then we're doing it wrong. So, the way that this sentence used to read, Shehem mishtachavim lahevel varik umitpalim el elo Yoshia v'anachnu, right? So they, the other nations of the world, bow to emptiness and vanity and pray to a God who cannot save, but we, the Jewish people, bow in worship, korim umishtachavim umodim, and thank and have gratitude for the supreme King of Kings, Melech Malchei Hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy Blessed One. So what does it say in our Siddur? It says, we bend the knee and bow, acknowledging the King of Kings, the Holy One, blessed be, the Holy Blessed One. So in taking out that parallelism, here's what they do versus what we do, all of a sudden this sentence seems to sort of come out of nowhere. Right? We talked a little bit about the parallelism of the poem of this prayer. Right? Aleinu l'shabeach l'zon hakol is stick 1 of the first line. La'tekidu al yotzer b'reshit is stick 2 of the first line. Those phrases mean the same thing. It's parallelism. Shalo asanu ki goyei haratzot v'lo samanu ki mishpachot adama. Again, parallelism. Shalo sam chalkenu kahem v'gor aleinu kechol amonam. Again, parallelism. And then our Siddur took out the parallelism of the next sentence. They do X, Y, and Z, but we do the true thing. Instead, it just says, and we do the true thing, and so we bow, acknowledging the Supreme Sovereign, the Holy One who is praised. So I don't know. Can it still be beautiful even without that line? Of course. But now that you know that the line is there, doesn't it feel like there's something missing? Maybe a little bit. Okay, and God is the King of Kings, the Supreme Sovereign, and we acknowledge that sovereign. So the word modim, v'anachnu korim umishtachavim umodim. So we bend our knees and we bow and we modim. So what does it mean to be modeh? Modeh actually means 2 different things. It means to thank, to have gratitude, and it means to acknowledge, to agree. So, if I'm in a disagreement with somebody, and then after listening to them for a little while, I agree with them, like, oh, they've convinced me, I might say, okay, I'm modeh, I agree, I relinquish my claim to being right. I agree with your understanding of this moment. Or you could say, in the Talmud, it's always saying, okay, well, this rabbi disagrees with this rabbi. How could it be that these rabbis are disagreeing? Well, they agree on this case. They're modeh on this case, but they're disagreeing on this case. So the word modeh means to agree, to acknowledge. But it also means to have gratitude. It's almost like in Jewish tradition, the idea of acknowledgement and the idea of gratitude are so deeply intertwined that it's the same word. That just to say thank you is to acknowledge that somebody else did something for you. To say thank you is to acknowledge that you are not alone in the world. To say thank you is to acknowledge that that each of us is powerless. It's a very powerful idea that the words mean the same thing. So that's why I pointed out that in one translation it says to have gratitude. In another translation it says to acknowledge. But they're the same word. So I thank the Supreme King of Kings, the Supreme Sovereign, the Holy One who is praised. And what does God do? Shehu, God, is Noteh Shamayim v'Yosed Aretz. What are the characteristics, what are the attributes of our God, as opposed to the God who doesn't save, or as opposed to vanity and nothingness? Or at least in our conception of the prayer, what are the attributes of our God? Not in comparison to anything else, but just what are the attributes of our God? Our God is the God who spreads out the heavens and establishes the earth, whose glory abides in the highest heavens, and whose powerful presence resides in the highest heights. Ushechinat uzo begovhei meromim, hu Eloheinu ein od. This is our God, none else. Or in this translation, who spread out the heavens and laid the foundations of the earth, whose glorious abode is in the highest heavens, whose mighty dominion is in the loftiest heights. Or here, who extends the heavens and establishes the earth, whose throne of glory is in the heavens above, and whose power's presence is in the highest of heights. Shechinat uzo, whose power's presence. Shechinah is presence with a capital P. Shekhinah is the word that means God's tangible presence, God's presence in the world. Shekhinah. Now, presence with a capital P is one of my favorite names for God. That's one of the words that I use to describe God a lot. And very recently, only in the last year, have I really started to understand that, that's what Shekhinah is. Shekhinah is presence with a capital P. I have to say, I always felt a little uncomfortable about Shekhinah. I always felt like Shekhinah was some kind of feminine version of God, or God's female presence, or some idea of some esoteric mysticism that I didn't understand. As I get a little older, I understand I'm not so old, but as I get a little older, the idea of that God's presence has a feminine aspect to it bothers me a little less. The idea that I could use the traditional word, Shekhinah, which means God's presence with a capital P, as opposed to just saying it in English, that also connects to me more. And also the idea of mysticism, the presence of mystery in the world, it works a little more for me now than it did when I was young and sure of myself. This is our God, none else. Ours is the true sovereign. There is no other. Hu Eloheinu ein od, emet malkeinu, efes zulato. There is nothing other than God. There is no other sovereign other than God. Kakatuv b'torato, as it says in God's Torah. V'yadata yom v'hashevot elavavecha ki Adonai hu Elohim b'shamayim ma'al v'al haaretz mitachat ein od. This verse comes from the book of Deuteronomy, from Parashat V'etchanan, my bar mitzvah Torah portion, and it means, know this and take it to heart, that Adonai is God in heaven above and on earth below. There is no other, ein od. Ein od. There is no other like God. I think if you had to have a theme if you had to say in 2 words what the purpose of Aleinu is, it would be those 2 words, ein od. There is no other. There is no other. V'yadata hayom v'hashevota levavecha ki Adonai hu Elohim. You shall know and take heart this day that the Lord is God in heaven above and on earth below. There is no other. So that's the whole first paragraph. Now let's read the whole second paragraph. And where the first paragraph was very much a particularist vision, an idea of our Jewish people's responsibility with respect to God, the second paragraph expands back out to a universal vision of the end times, to a universal vision of God's sovereignty. Remember that this that this prayer comes originally from the sovereignty section, the Malchuyot section of the Musaf Amidah for Rosh Hashanah. And so it is an introduction to the idea of God's sovereignty. So far we've talked about our relationship to God, the Jewish people's relationship to God. Now we're going to shift back into God's relationship to the whole world, God's relationship to the universe. I'm just going to read the whole paragraph in English from Lev Shalem and then from the Koran Siddur. Al Kain. And so, Adonai, our God, we await you, that soon we may behold your strength revealed in full glory, sweeping away the abominations of the earth, obliterating idols, establishing in the world the sovereignty of the Almighty. All flesh will call out your name, even the wicked will turn toward you. Then all who live on earth will understand and know that to you alone every knee must bend, all allegiance be sworn. They will bow down and prostrate themselves before you, Adonai, our God. Treasure your glorious name and accept the obligation of your sovereignty. May you soon rule over them forever and ever, for true dominion is yours, and you will rule in glory until the end of time. As it is written in your Torah, Adonai will reign forever and ever. And as the prophet said, Adonai shall be acknowledged sovereign of all the earth. On that day, Adonai shall be one, and the name of God shall be one. Therefore, we place our hope in you, Lord our God, that we may soon see the glory of your power when you will remove abominations from the earth, and idols will be utterly destroyed, when the world will be perfected under the sovereignty of the Almighty, when all humanity will call on your name to turn all the earth's wicked toward you. All the world's inhabitants will realize and know that to you every knee must bow and every tongue must swear loyalty. Before you, Lord our God, they will kneel and bow down and give honor to your glorious name. They will all accept the yoke of your kingdom, and you will reign over them soon and forever. For the kingdom is yours, and to all eternity you will reign in glory. As it is written in your Torah, the Lord will reign forever and ever. As it is said, then the Lord shall be king over all the earth. On that day the Lord shall be one, and God's name shall be one. It's a very different tone, I think, than the first paragraph. First paragraph, very much about our relationship with God. Second paragraph, God's relationship with the whole world and our hope that the world will be in relationship with God. And that relationship with God includes the destruction of what we talked about in the first paragraph, those folks who choose to worship vanity and nothingness, who worship a God who does not save, right? The presence of that in the first paragraph makes the second paragraph's focus on destroying those idols make more sense. The way that we read it, it sort of seems to come out of nowhere. I just want to close with this. I find this idea of destroying all the other idols pretty uncomfortable. I don't believe that there's only one path to God and that it's our path. And I don't believe that Judaism's belief is that there's only one path. But this is one voice in our tradition. One voice in our tradition is that our path is the path, and we say the Aleinu at the end of every service. So I think we have to struggle with the Aleinu, with what it means, and we have to be willing to, yes, kiddo, I'll be right with you. We have to be willing to force ourselves to struggle with the uncomfortable parts, even of the prayers that we say all the time without thinking. When Rachel and I were in Israel, we visited the Church of the Multiplication of the Loaves and the Fishes on the shore of the Sea of Galilee in the Kinneret in the north of Israel, a place where, according to Christian tradition, Jesus performed a miracle for the masses and fed everybody, the Church of the Multiplication. And about a week before we visited there, some Jewish terrorists had burned down the rectory where the monks of that church lived and had scrawled on the wall of the church, "V'ha'elilim karot yikaretun." The idols will be utterly destroyed. A quote from Ar Aleinu. And so I cannot say the words of Aleinu without thinking about that graffiti scrawled on the wall of the church after this terrible fire that, thank God, didn't kill anyone, but very well could have if a monk hadn't been awake in the middle of the night and smelled smoke. And these were obviously Jewish terrorists because the quote that they scrawled was from the Aleinu. And what they did there was what I would call a hate crime. And so we have to be careful about the words of our prayers. We have to be careful about how they're interpreted, how we interpret them. What do we mean when we say, "V'ha elilim karot yikaretun"? So with that, we come to a close of our Iyun Tefillah, our deep dive into this part of the service, the concluding part of the service, our Aleinu prayer. I hope that you enjoyed, whether you were joining in person or by live stream. And we are going to begin now in just a moment, with our regular Shabbat Shacharit service. Dan, it's good to see you in person. Shabbat Shalom and welcome to Congregation Agudat Achim's in-person and live stream Shabbat morning service. My name is Rabbi Rafi Spitzer. It's a pleasure to join. This is Ellie, my daughter. It's a pleasure to join with you this morning for Shabbat Parashat Chukat. Today is Juneteenth, the 19th of June, on which we recognize as a country the end of slavery in Galveston, Texas, about 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation. I have to say, this was a part of history that I didn't learn in the history textbooks when I was learning history in high school or in college. I didn't know that it took 2 years for slavery to completely be abolished in our country. I guess I sort of imagined that Abraham Lincoln said one thing one time and that was the end of it. Obviously, that's a naive assumption. And it is important for us as Jewish people to acknowledge and recognize Juneteenth as a significant holiday for several reasons. One, we have members of our community who are people of color, Jews of color and black Jews who have history of oppression both within the Jewish community and within the broader American culture, and it's important to honor the holidays that are significant and the cultural assumptions that are significant for all of the ethnicities that make up Jewish identity, including black Jews. Also, it's important for us to recognize the way in which our story of liberation overlaps with, is an inspiration to, and connects to other people's stories of liberation. The Jewish people's story of the Exodus from Egypt is a story which had so much meaning for many of the enslaved Africans in America's South, and which systemic oppression also came from America's North, that our ancestors, perhaps not our individual ancestors, but for some of us in this room, people whose ancestors contributed to a economic and social enslavement of African immigrants to this country who were brought here by force and who were enslaved for hundreds of years and continue to suffer even to this day under systemic oppression and systemic racism. It's important to raise up and acknowledge our complicity in that struggle and to engage deeply in the work of dismantling and changing and reforming the institutions of our country that continue to have systemic oppression, systemic racism. So now that I've mentioned Juneteenth, I will also say that this Shabbat is the Shabbat on which we are celebrating Pride Shabbat. And I will be adding in a couple of prayers drawn from this Sidur, Mishkan Ge'ava, where Pride Dwells, a celebration of LGBTQ Jewish life and ritual. That was edited by Rabbi Denise Egger, who I know, who is a Reform rabbi in California, and who has done some really tremendous. She was the first out lesbian rabbi in the country. She has a lot of wisdom to share, and I will share a couple of blessings in honor of Pride. And my Devar Torah this morning takes up this idea of pride. So again, welcome, Shabbat Shalom. It's a pleasure to be with you in person, and we pick up our service with Baruch She'amar on page 54.
Baruch She'amar v'hayaholam baruch hu. Baruch Hoseh v'reshit, Baruch Omer v'yoseh, Baruch Ozer v'kayim, Baruch Merachem al ha'aretz, Baruch Merachem al ha'briot, Baruch Meshalim al shechar tov l'reav, Baruch Chai leyad v'kayam lanetzach, Baruch Podeh matzil, Baruch Shemoho, Baruch Atah. Yachid Cheholamim, Melech Mishbach and Fadayat Shemo HaGadol, Baruch Atah Adonai, Melech Mehulal Batishbachot.
You may be seated as we continue with Ashrei, page 80.
Ashrei Yoshvei Veitecha Od Yalalucha Selah, Ashrei Amshkachalo, Odavim. תהילת אדוני ידבר פיו יברך כל בשר שמקדשו לעולם ועד ואנחנו נברך ים מעתה ועד עולם הללויה.
We continue with Nishmat, page 334, page 334.
נשמת כל חי תברך את שמך אדוני אלוהינו. נהללך ונשבחך ונפארך ונברך את שם קודשך כאמור. לדוד ברכי נפשי את אדוני וכל קרבי את שם קודשו. האל בתעצומות עוזך הגדול בכבוד שמך, הגיבור בנצח ונורא בנורתך, המלך היושב על כיסא רם ונשא.
The formal chanting of Shachrit begins with the words Shofein Ad in the middle of page 334.
שוכן עד מהרום וקדוש שמו, וכתוב רענו צדיקים באדוני לשנים לעתילה. בפי ישרים תתהלל ובדברי צדיקים תתברך, ובלשון חסידים תתרומם, ובקרב קדושים תתקדש. ובמחלות רבבות עמך בית ישראל ברינה יפאר. שכן חובת כל היצורים לפניך, אדוני אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו, להודות להלל, לשבח, לפאר, לרומם, להדר, לברך, לעלה ולקלס, על כל דברי שירות ותשבחות, דוד בן ישי, עבדך משיחך.
Rise for Yishtabach.
ישתבח שמך ליד מלכנו, האל כלפניך. ברכות והודעות מעתה ועד עולם, ברוך אתה אדוני, אל מלך גדול בתשבחות, אל ההודעות אדון הנפלאות, הבוחר בשירי זמרה, מלך אלכי העולמים.
We continue now with the blessings before Kriyat Shema, page 340.
ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, יוצר אור ובורא חושך, עושה שלום ובורא את הכל.
May be seated, middle of page 340.
אין כערכך אדוני אלוהינו בעולם הזה, ואין זולתך מלכנו לחיי עולם הבא. אפס בלתך גואלנו לימות המשיח, ואין דומה לך, מושיענו לתחיית המתים. אל אדון על כל המעשים, ברוך ומבורך בפי כל נשמה, גדלו וטובו מלא עולם, דעת ותבונה סובבים אותו, המתגאה על חיות הקודש ונדר וכבוד על המרחבה, זכות ומישור לפני כיסו, חסד ורחמים לפני כבודו. טובים מאורות שברא אלוהינו, יצרם בדעת, בבינה ובהשכל, כוח וגבורה, נתן בהם להיות מושלים בקרב תבל. מלאים זיו ומפיקים נוגה, נאה זיום בכל העולם, שמחים בצאתם וששים בבואם, עושים בימה רצון קונם. פאר וכבוד נותנים לשמוץ עליו, ארינה לזכר מלכותו, קרא לשמש ויזרח אורה, והתקין צורת הלבנה. שבח נותנים לו כל צבא מרום, תפארת וגדולה, שרפים ואופנים וחיות הקודש. לאל אשר שבח שעשיתם פרחו וסלה. תתברך צורנו מלכנו גואלנו, בורא קדושים, ישתבח שמך. וכולם פותחים את פיהם בקדושה וטהרה, בשירה וזמרה, ומברכים ומשבחים ומפארים, ומריצים ומקדישים וממליכים את שם האל, המלך הגדול, הגיבור, אנחנו לא מקבלים עליהם רשות זה לזה, להקדיש ליוצרם מנחת רוח בשפה ורבנימה קדושה, כולם כחרונים ואומרים ביראה, קדוש 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 אדוני צבאות מלוא כל הארץ כבודו. והאופנים וחיות הקודש ברעש גדול מתנסים למצרפים, לעומתם בשבחים ואומרים ברוך כבוד אדוני ממקומו, לאל ברוך ממות איתי. חדש על ציון תאיר, נזכחו לנו מהרה לאורו, ברוך אתה אדוני יוצר המאורות. אהבה רבה אהבתנו, אדוני אלוהינו, חמלה גדולה ויתרה חמלת עלינו. אבינו מלכנו בעבור אבותינו, שבטחו בך, אבינו מלכנו. ותלמדם חוקי חיים, כמתיכוננו תלמדנו, אבינו האב הרחמן, המרחם רחם עלינו. ותן בליבנו להבין ולהשכיל לשמוע, ללמוד וללמד, לשמוע ולעשות, ולקיים את כל דברי תלמוד תורתך באהבה. והאר עינינו בתורתך, ודבק ליבנו במצוותיך, ויחל לבבינו לאהבה וליראה את שמך. ולא נבוש לעולם ועד, ולא נבוש לעולם ועד, כי בשם קודשך הגדול והנורא בטחנו, נגילה ונשמחה בישועתך. והביאנו לשלום מארבע כנפות הארץ, ותוליכנו קוממיות לארצנו. כי אל פועל ישועות אתה ובנו, בחרת מכל עם ולשון, וקרבתנו לשמך הגדול. סלע באמת להודות לך ולייחדך באהבה. שמע ישראל, אדוני אלוהינו, אדוני אחד. ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך. והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך, ושיננתם לבניך ודיברת בם, בשבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך, ובשוכבך ובקומך, וקשרתם להיות על ידיך, והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך. והיה שמות השם. ויאמר אדוני אל משה לאמור, דבר אל בני ישראל, ואמרת עליהם, ויעשו להם ציצית על כנפי בגדיהם לדורותם, ונתנו על ציצית הכנף פתיל תכלת, והיה לכם לציצית, וראיתם אותו, וזכרתם את כל מצוות אדוני, ועשיתם אותם, ולא תטורו אחרי לבבכם ואחרי עיניכם, אשר אתם זונים אחריהם, למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותיי, והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם, אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים להיות לכם לאלוהים, אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אדוני אלוהיכם אמת. אמת ויציב ונכון וקיים בשם. לדור ודור הוא קיים ושמו קיים, וכיסו נכון ומלכותו ואמונתו ליד קיימת, ודבריו חיים וקיימים. אמת שאתה הוא אדוני אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו, מלכנו מלך אבותינו, גואלנו גואל אבותינו, יוצרנו צור ישועתנו, פולדנו מצילנו מעלם שמך, אין אלוהים זולתך, עזרת אבותינו אתה הוא מעולם, מגנו דור ודור. תהילות ליל עליון, ברוך ומבורך, משה בני ישראל, לך אנו שירה, בשמחה רבה ויאמרו כולם, מי כמוך באלים אדוני, מי כמוך נדר בקודש, נורא תהילות אוסף אלך, שירה חדשה, שיבחו גלים שמך על שפת הים, יחד כולם הודו והמליכו ואמרו, Adonai ימלוך לעולם ועד.
We rise, page 352 for Tzur Yisrael. Following Tzur Yisrael, we begin the Amidah for Shabbat morning on page 354 together with Howie. And after the Kedusha, we continue with the individual whispered Amidah on page 358 through page 365. We rise for Tzur Yisrael, page 352.
Tzur Yisrael, kuma be'ezrat Yisrael, ufdeichenu mecha Yehuda ve'Yisrael, go aleinu Adonai tzevot shemo, kedosh Yisrael, baruch atah Adonai, Gaal Yisrael. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu ve'Elohei Avoteinu, Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak ve'Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel ve'Elohei Leah, Ha'el Hagadol, Hagibor Hanora, El Elyon, Gomel Chasadim Tovim ve'Konei HaKol, ve'Zocher Chasdei Avot, ומביא גואל לבני בניהם למען שמו באהבה מלך עוזר ופקד מושיע ומגן ברוך אתה אדוני מגן אברהם ופוקד שרה אתה גיבור לעולם אדוני מחיה מתים את הרב להושיע מכלכל חיים בחסד מחיי מתים ברחמים רבים, סומך נופלים ורופא חולים, ומתיר אסורים, ומקיים אמונתו לשני עפר. מי כמוך בעל גבורות, ומידו מלך, מלך ממית ומחיה, ומצמיח ישועה, ונאמן אתה לחיות מתים. ברוך אתה אדוני, מחיי המתים. נקדש שמך בעולם, כשם שמקדישים אותו בשמי מרום, ככתוב על יד נביאך, וקרא זה אל זה ויאמר, קדוש, 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 Adonai Tzvaot Melech haaretz kevodo. Az bekol rash gadol adir v'chazak mashmim kol mitnasim liumatzrafim liumatam baruch yomeru. Baruch kevod Adonai mimkomo mimkomcha malkeinu tofia v'timloch aleinu ki mechakim anachnu lach matai timloch b'tzion v'karo b'yameinu leolam voed tishkon תתקדל ותתקדש בתוך ירושלים עירך לדור ודור לנצח נצחים ועינינו תראנה מלכותך כדבר האמור בשירי עוזך ועינינו תראנה מלכותך כדבר האמור בשירי עוזך על ידי דוד על ידי דוד משיח צדקך ימלוך אדוני לעולם אלוהי ציון לדור ודור ימלוך אדוני לעולם אלוהי ציון לדור ודור הללויה לדור ודור נגיד גודלך ולנצח נצחים קדושתך נקדיש בשפחך אלוהינו בפינו למוש לעולם ועד כי אל מלך גדול וקדוש אתה ברוך אתה אדוני האל הקדוש אתה חנן
If you haven't completed your individual whispered Amidah, please continue davening. We join together for Kaddish Shalem, page 392.
יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה.
אמן.
בעלמא דברה חירותי וימליך מלכותי בחייכון ויומכון ובחיי דכל בית ישראל בעגלה בזמן קריב ויאמרו.
אמן.
אמן. יהי שמי רבה מבורך לעולם עולמי. יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי דקודשה בריחו לאלה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה תשבחתה ונחמתה דמירן בעלמא ויאמרו
אמן.
תקבל סלטון ותהון דכל ישוע קדם ובהון דיבי שמעיה ויאמרו אמן. יהי שלמה רבה מן שמעיה וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ויאמרו אמן. עושה שלום במרומיו הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ישראל ויאמרו אמן.
We turn back to page 32 for the Psalm for Shabbat. Yes.
היום יום שבת קודש, שבו הילדים אומרים בבית המקדש, מזמור שיר ליום השבת. טוב לכם. עוד ינגון בצבע דשנים ורענים יהיו, להגיד כי ישר אדוני צורי ולא עוולתה בו.
Kaddish Avelim, Mourner's Kaddish, page 52. Yitkadal, Yitkadash, Shemei Rabbah, Be'alma Divra Kirtei, Be'amlich Malchutei, B'chayechon U'vyomechon U'v'chayei Dechol Beit Yisrael, Ba'agala U'vizman Kari V'imru Amen. Yehi Shmei Rabbah Mevarach Le'alam Olamei Almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpor v'yitromam v'yitnaseh v'yithadar v'yit'aleh v'yithalal shmei dekudesha berichu le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechemata da'amiran be'alma v'imru amen. Yehi shlama rabba min shemaya v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Aseh shalom mimromav, hu yaseh shalom, aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen.
Amen.
Shabbat shalom. Welcome to Congregation Agudat Achim's in-person and live stream Shabbat morning service. She'll be here when she's here. We are continuing to wear masks in the sanctuary in our building during this time where not all of our congregants are eligible for vaccination, as a way of being welcoming to all comers. And we thank you for your continued commitment to everybody's well-being, comfort, and safety. Most of the other ways in which we have altered our service because of the COVID pandemic have shifted. We do still have some seats which are socially distant, and we also have seats which are not socially distant. We have resumed singing together, and we have brought back up onto our bima Gabaim who are able to correct the words of the Torah so that we have the best possible Torah reading. We're continuing to ask people who have an aliyah to the Torah to take their aliyah from the base of the bima, both so that we don't have overcrowded on the bima, and also so that we don't have to ask people who are taking aliyot whether they are vaccinated or not, but we're able to just offer aliyot to everybody. I invite everybody now to turn to page 392 for the service for taking the Torah out, 394 for the service for taking the Torah out of the ark.
אין כמוך באלוהים אדוני ואין כמעשיך מלכותך מלכות כל עולמים וממשלתך בכל דור ודור אדוני מלך אדוני מלך אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד אדוני עוז לעמו ייתן אדוני יברך את עמו בשלום, אב הרחמים, היטיבה ברצונך, את ציון. תבנה חומות ירושלים, תבנה חומות ירושלים, כי בך לבד בטחנו, מלך אל רם ונישא, אדון עולמים.
Please rise and put our
ויהי בנשוא אהרון, ויאמר משה, קומה אדוני, ויפוצו אויביך, ואנוסו משנאיך מפניך, כי מציון תצא תורה, כי מציון תצא תורה, ודבר אדוני מירושלים, ברוך שנתן תורה תורה, ברוך שנתן תורה תורה, אדוני ישראל בקדושתו. בריך שמי דמרי עלמא, בריך בענה רחץ, ולשמי קדישה, קדישה יקירה, עני מרתוש פחן, יהי רבק אדמך, תפתח ליבי באורייתא, ותשלים משאלים תליבי, וליבה דכל עמך ישראל, לטוב ולחיים ולשלום. אמן. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad.
Echad Eloheinu, Gadol Adonenu, Kadosh Shmo.
Echad Eloheinu, Gadol Adonenu, Kadosh Shemo.
Gadol Adonai iti, umeromema Shemo yachtav. Lecha Adonai hagdula, hagilura, hagiferet,
והנצח וההוד, כי כל השמיים ובארץ, לך אדוני הממלכה, והמנשא לכל ראש, רוממו, רוממו, אדוני אלוהינו, והשתחוו, והשתחוו, רגליו קדוש הוא, רוממו, רוממו, אדוני אלוהינו, והשתחוו, והשתחוו, להר קודשו כי קדוש, אדוני אלוהינו. We remain standing as the Torah is lifted. Zot HaTorah asher sam Moshe livnei bnei Yisrael al pi Adonai You may be seated. We're reading this morning from Parashat Chukat, which can be found in our red Eitz Chaim Chumash on page 880, page 880. We're reading in the middle of the of the portion. Oh, sorry. We're reading at the beginning of the Torah portion. Oh, this is one of those weird things that because often Chukat and Balak are read together on years in the triennial where it's the second triennial and we're not reading them together, we actually end up reading 2/3 of this parsha to make sure that we're reading the right chunk, so that next year we're not, when we read the last third, that we're not picking up in a part that we're not missing any parts. So we are actually beginning from the beginning of the Torah portion, page 880, chapter 19, verse 1. This section of the portion is the law of the para aduma, a cow which must be taken without blemish in order to enact a ritual of purification. We can follow along on page 880. Vayazor v'yagim v'yoshiel kol kosim bo v'nomar amen. Hakol havu g'dolinu kavod ha'torah tamod. Hanarafel.
Bad Henoch v'chaya.
Bad Hanoch v'chaya. Aliyah harishona baruch shmatan Torah l'moiso b'kushato. V'atem ha'dikim ha'lechem ha'chaim v'chem hayom. Since we did not have a minyan at the start of our Shacharit service today, we did not yet do Barku. This, therefore, is our Barku, so I invite everybody to stand for Barku, and as Caitlin does the Aliyah, to respond and to think of it as your Barku.
Baruch Hu et Adonai Hamvorach.
Baruch Adonai Hamvorach Olam Vaed.
Baruch Adonai Hamvorach V'Olam Vaed. Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech HaOlam Asher Bachar Banu Mikol Ha'amim V'Natan Lanu et Torato. Baruch Atah Adonai Noten HaTorah.
Amen.
Amen. Vaydaber Adonai el Moshe ve'el Aharon lemor. Zot lemor, zot chukat haTorah, asher tziva Adonai lemor. Daber el bnei Yisrael, vayikechu elecha, bara aduma tamima, asher ein bamum, asher lo Allah aleha ohol. Unatatem ota el Elazar hakohen, vehotzihi ota el miklutz lamachane, veshachat ota lefanav. Velakach Elazar hakohen midama be'etzba'o, vehizah el nochach panei ohel moed midama sheva pa'amim. V'sarav et hapara le'nav, et orav et b'sarav et dama al pirsha yisrov. V'lakach hakohen eitz erez ve'ezov ushni tola'at, v'hishlich el toch srefat hapara.
Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech HaOlam Asher Natan Lanu Torah Emet V'chayei Olam Nata B'tochinu. Baruch Atah Adonai Noten HaTorah.
Amen.
Amen. Ta'amod. Shoshana. Batet V'chaya. Aliyah Shenit. The second Aliyah can be found on page 881, verse 7.
Baruch Hu et Adonai Hamvorach. Baruch Adonai Hamvorach V'Olam Vaed. Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech HaOlam Asher Bachar Banu Mikol Ha'amim V'Natan Lanu et Torato. Baruch Atah Adonai Noten HaTorah.
Amen.
Amen. V'chibes begadav hakohen merachatz b'saro b'mayim ve'achar yavo el hamachane v'tameh hakohen ad ha'arev ve'hasorev ota yikabes begadav b'mayim ve'rachatz b'saro b'mayim v'tameh ad ha'arev ve'asaf ish tahor et efer ha'para v'hiniach michutz lamachane b'makom tahor v'haytaha v'adat b'nei Yisrael mishmeret l'menidach chotati.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech olam asher natan lanu Torah emet v'chayei olam natav mitotenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
Amen. Talmud. Esther bat Eliyahu v'Tzipora, Aliyah Shalishit. The third Aliyah can be found on page 881, verse 10.
Baruch et Adonai Hamvorach.
Baruch Adonai
Baruch Adonai Baruch Le'olam Va'ed. Baruch et Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch et Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
Amen. V'chibes ha'osef et efer ha'para et begadav v'tameh ad ha'arev v'haytah livnei Yisrael v'lager hagar b'tocham lechukat olam hanogea b'met lechol nefesh adam v'tameh shivat yamim hu yitchatavo bayom hashlishi ubayom hashvi'i yitar ve'im lo yitchatah bayom hashlishi ubayom hashvi'i lo yitar kol hanogea b'met b'nefesh ha'adam asher yamud velo yitchatah et mishkan Adonai timeh v'nichreta ha'nefesh ha'hime Yisrael ki menida lo zorak alav tameh od tumatovo zot haTorah adam ki yamut ba'ohel kol haba el ha'ohel v'chol asher ba'ohel yitma shivat yamim v'chol kli patuach asher in samid patil alav tamehu v'chol asher yigah al pnei hasadeh v'chal al cherev o v'meid o v'etzem adam o v'kaver yitma shivat yamim v'lakachu latameh me'efer srefat hachatat v'natan alav mayim chayim el keli.
Baruch et Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torah emet v'chayei olam natav b'tochenu. Baruch et Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
Amen. Talmud. Aharona bat
Mayor Yitzchak.
Meir Yitzchak from Aliyah Revi'it. The fourth Aliyah can be found on page 883, chapter 19, verse 18.
Baruch hu et Adonai Hamvorach.
Baruch Adonai Va'ed.
Baruch Adonai Baruch Le'olam Va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
Amen. V'lachach ezo v'taval b'mayim ishtahor והיזע על האוהל ועל כל הכלים ועל הנפשות אשר היו שם ועל הנוגע בעצם או בחלל או במת או בקבר והיזע הטהור על הטמא ביום השלישי וביום השביעי וחיטאו ביום השביעי וכיבס בגדיו ורחץ במים וטהר בערב ואיש אשר יטמא ולא יחטא ונקרתה הנפש ההיא מתוך הקהל כי את מקדש אדוני טימא מנידה לא זורק עליו טמא הוא והייתה להם לחוקת עולם ומה זה מהנידה יכבס בגדיו והנוגע במי הנידה יטמא עד הערב וכל אשר יגבו הטמא יטמא והנפש הנוגעת תטמא עד הערב
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torah temet v'chayei olam natav b'tochenu Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Moshe ben Chaim Benani, Aliyah Chamishit, the fifth Aliyah, page 883, chapter 20, verse 1.
Baruch Hu Adonai Baruch Baruch Adonai Baruch Le'olam Va'ed Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et Torato Baruch Atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. Vayavo b'nei Yisrael kol ha'edah midbartzin b'chodesh harishon vayeshev ha'am b'kadesh v'tamod sham Miriam v'tikaver sham v'lo haya ha'mayim la'edah vayikalu al Moshe ve'al Aharon Vayarev ha'am im Moshe vayomru lemor velu gavanu bigva ha'achinu lifnei Adonai velama havetem et kahal Adonai el hamidbar hazeh lamut sham anachnu uvirenu ולמה העליתונו ממצרים להביא אותנו אל המקום הרע הזה לא מקום זרע ותאנה וגפן ורימון ומים אין לשתות ויבוא משה ואהרון מפני הקהל אל פתח אוהל מועד ויפלו על פניהם וירא כבוד אדוני עליהם.
Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torah emet v'chayei olam natav b'tochenu Baruch Atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. Go ahead. Dan's going to bench Gomel after following the surgery and his recovery.
Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hagomel chayavim tovot shegmalani kol tov.
Amen. Mi shegmalcha kol tuv, hu yigmalcha kol tuv sela.
Thank you.
Yamod. Eliyahu Chaim. Ben Arona. Aliyah Shishit. The sixth Aliyah can be found on page 884, chapter 20, verse 7.
Baruch Hu Adonai Hambarach.
Baruch Adonai Baruch Le'olam Va'ed.
Baruch Adonai Baruch Le'olam Va'ed. Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch Atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. וידבר אדוני אל משה לאמור, קח את המטה, והקל את עדת אהרון אחיך, ודיברתם אל הסלע לעיניהם ונתן מימיו, והוצאת עליהם מים מן הסלע, והשקית את העדה ואת בעירם. ויקח משה את המטה מלפני אדוני כאשר ציווהו, ויקהילו משה ואהרון את הקהל אל פני הסלע, ויאמר להם, שימו נא המורים המן הסלע הזה נוציא לכם מים. וירם משה את ידו, ויח את הסלע במטהו פעמיים, ויצאו מים רבים, ותשת העדה ובעירם. ויאמר אדוני אל משה ואל אהרון, יען לא האמנתם בי להקדישני לעיני בני ישראל, לכן לא תביאו את הקהל הזה אל הארץ אשר נתתי להם, המה מריבה אשר רבו בני ישראל את אדוני ויקדש בם.
ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם אשר נתן לנו תורת אמת וחיי עולם נטע בתוכנו. ברוך אתה אדוני נותן התורה.
אמן. The seventh Aliyah can be found on page 886. We welcome the Weiss family, celebrated this week. A tremendous simcha of the welcoming into the covenant of the Jewish people, both of their grandchildren and their children, Sean and Ryan, who celebrated becoming Jewish and were immersed in the mikvah this past Sunday. We celebrate with Adam, with Stephanie, with their whole family, and it's a pleasure to honor you with this Aliyah in recognition of the joyous simcha of this week. I'm so glad that you guys are here and welcome.
Baruch Hu es Adonai HaBaruch.
Baruch Adonai Baruch Le'olam Va'ed.
Baruch Adonai HaBaruch Le'olam Va'ed. Baruch Adonai HaBaruch Le'olam Va'ed. Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech Haolam Asher Bacha Beinu Michol Havamim V'nosan Lanu Es Torah. Baruch Atah Adonai Nosein HaTorah.
Amen. וישלח משה מלאכים מקדש אל מלך אדום, כה אמר אחיך ישראל אתה ידעת את כל התלה אשר מצאתנו, וירדו אבותינו מצרימה ונשב מצרים ימים רבים, ויראו לנו מצרים ולאבותינו, ונצעק אל אדוני וישמע קולנו, וישלח מלאך ויוציאנו ממצרים, והנה אנחנו בקדש עיר קצה גבולך, נברנה בארצך, לא נעבור בשדה ובחרם ולא נשתה בני באר, דרך המלך נלך, לא ניטה ימין ושמאל עד אשר נעבור גבולך. ויאמר אליו אדום לא תעבור בי, פן בחרב אצא לקראתך. ויאמרו אליו בני ישראל במסילה נעלה, ואם מימך נשתה אני ומקנאי, ונתתי מכרם, רק אין דבר ברגלי אבורה. Vayomer lo tavor vayitze yadom likrato b'am kavedu v'yad chazaka v'chazaka v'ymaen edom nitonet Yisrael avor bigulo v'yed Yisrael me'lam.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher nosan lanu taras emes v'hayei shalom natah v'sachenu Baruch atah Adonai nosein haTorah.
Amen. Simen tov, mazel tov, mazel tov, simen tov, simen tov, mazel tov, mazel tov, simen tov, simen tov, mazel tov, mazel tov, simen tov. Yeilanu, 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 ulechol Yisrael. Yeilanu, yeilanu, ulechol Yisrael. Yeilanu, yeilanu, ulechol Yisrael. Yeilanu, yeilanu, ulechol Yisrael. We rise as the ark is open for the healing prayer. Misha beirach avoteinu mikor habracha leimotenu. May the source of strength, who blessed the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say, Amen. Misha beirach avoteinu Avraham Yitzchak v'Yaakov, Sarah Rivka Rachel v'Leah yivrech v'yirpeh et hacholim, et Shai Aviad ben Balfura, et Fegalea bat Minsasura, et Shalom ben Chaya, et Rachel bat Avram, et Andrew Parisi, et Chris Parisi, et Yudit bat Reuven Berezel, et Sharona Nechama bat Reuven Berezel, et Gabriel Mordechai ben Pesi, et Omari Gray, Ve'et Chaya bat Dvorah, et Leah bat Dvorah, et Yakira bat Dvorah, et Buma bat Gittel, et Dina bat Fegel, et Eliza bat Dina, et Akiva ben Gittel, et Miriam bat Malka, et Eliyahu ben Malka, et Bracha bat Batya, et Miriam bat Sarah, et Menachem Mendel ben Zipporah, et Robert Borshwitz, et Yoreh bat Sarah, et Don Moshe ben Nani, et Kyle Scheffler, et Cecilia Lynn, et Michal Ruth bat Tova, et Linda Perlstein, et Robert Perlstein, et Michael Roberts, et Eric Hurst, V'yed Riva Bela bat Reza, v'yed Sima Freda bat Chana Yenta, v'Chana Sora bat Susha Nechama, v'et Shlomo Moshe ben Miriam, v'et Yitamasha bat Rachel, v'et Dylan Middleton, v'et Yaakov Moshe ben Batya Mindel, v'et Perry bat Shulamid, v'et Manish Yisachar ben Rachel, v'et Shmuel ben Yudit, v'et Shalom ben Chaya, v'et Asher Yosef ben Fega Malka, v'et Chaim Reuben ben Hinda, v'et Amy Laughlin, v'et Eliezer Ephraim ben Chaim Yehuda, v'et Alan Finger, v'et Shlomo ben Yudazev, v'et David Aaron ben Siva, v'et Matt Hopkins, v'et Froma bat Sarah, v'et Greta Jansen, v'et Avram Leba Kohen ben Miriam, v'et Vet kol hacholim b'gilag v'shazot HaKadosh Baruch Hu yimalei rachamim aleihem lachzikam l'rapotam yishlach lahem meira refuat shema min hashamayim refuat hanefesh refuat haguf v'tok shar chol Yisrael ba'olam v'chazek yidei otkim b'tzorchayhem Shabbat yin l'zok v'harefuat krava lavo ha-Shabbat alav zman kariv and omar Amen. Mishe beirach imotenu Mikor habracha lavotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say Amen. Hatzi Kaddish. Yitkada v'yitkada shemei Rava ve'alma divra kirtei v'yamlich malchutei v'chayechonu v'yomechon uv'chayei l'chol beit Yisrael bagala uv'izman karim v'meru Amen. Yesh mei Rava mevarach Le'alam l'almei almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yipar v'yitramam v'yinaseh v'yithadar v'yitalev v'yitalal shmei kudesha berichu le'elam imko berchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechemata damiran be'alma v'meru amen. Tamod Rivka Sarah bat Moshe Pesach v'ashrei Hinda Likriyata Haftarah.
Mosque here is found on page 886, beginning at verse 18.
Go check on Jordan. Baruch Hu Adonai Hamborach.
Baruch Adonai Hamborach Le'olam Va'ed.
Baruch Adonai Hamborach Le'olam Va'ed. Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu Melech Haolam Asher Bachar Banu Mikol Ha'amim V'natan Lanu Et Torato. Baruch Ata Adonai Noten HaTorah.
Amen. Vayomer Elav Edom Lo Tavor Bi Pen Bacher V'Tzei Likratecha. Vayomru Ela B'nei Yisrael B'Mesila Naleh V'im Memecha Nishtehani Umiknai V'natati Michram Rak Ein Davar B'Raglai Evora Vayomer Lo Tavor Vayetzei Edom Likrato Ba'am Kavedu V'Yad Chazaka Vayima'ein Edom Neton Et Yisrael Avor B'Gvulo Vayet Yisrael Melav.
Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu Melech Haolam Asher Natan Lanu Torat Emet V'Chayei Olam Nata B'Tochenu. Baruch Ata Adonai Noten HaTorah.
Amen. The Haftarah for Parashat Hukat can be found on page 910 and comes from the book of Judges from chapter 11. This is the story of Yiftach, the judge who promised that if he was able to win the war, he would sacrifice the first thing that comes out of his house. Of course, his sheep don't walk out of houses. His daughter walked out of his house, and he felt the necessity of child sacrifice. This is one of the cases in the Torah, in the Bible, where the Bible comes very clearly against the idea of child sacrifice. It was a fairly common practice in the Canaanite social milieu that the Jewish people were living in at that time. It's a complicated story. You can follow along on page 910 in the Chumash.
Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu Melech Haolam Asher Bachar B'Nevi'im Tovim V'Ratza V'Divreihem HaNe'emarim Be'emet. Baruch Ata Adonai Habocher B'Torah U'Moshe Avdo U'Yisrael Amo U'B'Nevi'ei HaEmet V'Tzedek. V'yiftach HaGiladi Haya Gibor Chayil V'hu Ben Isha Zona V'yoled Gilad Et Yiftach V'ateled Ishet Gilad Lo Banim V'yigdalu V'nei Ha'isha V'yagarshu Et Yiftach Vayomeru lo tincha b'beit avinu כי בן אישה אחרת אתה. ויברח יפתח מפני אחיו, וישב בארץ טוב. ויצלקתו את יפתח אנשים ריקים, ויצאו עמו. ויהי מימים, וילחמו בני עמון עם ישראל. ויהי כאשר נלחמו בני עמון עם ישראל, וילכו זקני גלעד לקחת את יפתח מארץ טוב. ויאמרו ליפתח לך, והיית לנו לקצין, ונלחמה בבני עמון. ויאמר יפתח לזקני גלעד, הלא אתם שנאתם אותי, ותגרשוני מבית אבי, ומדוע באתם אלי עתה כאשר צר לכם? ויאמרו זקני גלעד אל יפתח, לכן עתה שבנו אליך, והלכת עמנו ונלחמת בבני עמון, והיית לנו לראש לכל יושבי גלעד. ויאמר יפתח אל זקני גלעד, אם משיבים אתם אותי להילחם בבני עמון, ונתן אדוני אותם לפני, אנוכי אהיה לכם לראש. ויאמרו זקני גלעד אל יפתח, אדוני יהיה שומע בנותינו, אם לא כדברך כן נעשה. וילך יפתח עם זקני גלעד, וישימו העם אותו עליהם לראש ולקצין. וידבר יפתח את כל דבריו לפני אדוני במצפה. וישלח יפתח מלאכים אל מלך בני עמון לאמור, מה לי ולך כי באת אלי להילחם בארצי? ויאמר מלך בני עמון אל מלאכי יפתח, כי לקח ישראל את ארצי בעלותו ממצרים, מארנון ועד היבוק ועד הירדן, ועתה השיבה אתן בשלום. ויוסף עוד יפתח, וישלח מלאכים אל מלך בני עמון. ויאמר לו, כה אמר יפתח, לא לקח ישראל את ארץ מואב ואת ארץ בני עמון, כי בעלותם ממצרים. וילך ישראל במדבר עד ים סוף, ויבוא קדשה. וישלח ישראל מלאכים אל מלך אדום לאמור, אברנה וארצך. ולא שמע מלך אדום, וגם אל מלך מואב שלח ולא אהבה. וישב ישראל בקדש. וילך במדבר, ויאסף את ארץ אדום ואת ארץ מואב, ויבוא ממזרח שמש לארץ מואב, ויחנון בעבר ארנון. ולא באו בגבול מואב, כי ארנון גבול מואב. וישלח ישראל מלאכים אל סיחון מלך האמורים מלך חשבון. ויאמר לו ישראל, נא ברנה וארצך עד מקומי. ולא האמין סיחון את ישראל עבור בגבולו. ויאסוף סיחון את כל עמו, ויחנו ביצה, וילחם עם ישראל.
Vayitein Adonai Elohei Yisrael et Sichon v'et kol amo b'yad Yisrael vayakum vayirash Yisrael et kol eretz ha'emori yoshev ha'aretz hahi vayirshu et kol givol ha'emori me'arnon ve'ad hayabok umin hamidbar ve'ad hayardain Ve'ata Adonai Elohei Yisrael Horish et ha'emori mipnei amo Yisrael Ve'ata tirashenu Halo et asher yorishcha Kemosh Elohecha oto tirash Ve'et Kol asher horish Adonai Eloheinu mipanenu oto nirash ve'ata hatov tov ata mibalak ben Zippor melech Moav harov rav im Yisrael im nilcham bam beshevet Yisrael Becheshbon uvivnoteha uvivnoteha uvechol ha'arim asher al yedei arnon shilosh me'ot shana umadua lo hitzaltem be'etahi ve'anochi lo chatati lach ve'ata Osa iti ra'aleh yilachem bi Yishpot Adonai hashofet hayom Bein b'nei Yisrael ubein b'nei Amon Velo shama melech b'nei Amon El divrei yiftach asher shalach elav Vatahi al yiftach ruach Adonai vaya'avor et ha'gil'ad ve'et Menashe vaya'avor et mitzpeh Gil'ad umi mitzpeh Gil'ad avar b'nei Amon vayidar yiftach neder l'Adonai vayomar im naton titain et b'nei Amon b'yadi V'haya hayotze asher yetze midalte veti likrati b'shuvi v'shalom mibnei Amon v'haya l'Adonai v'ha'alitihu ola v'ya'avor yiftach el b'nei Amon l'hilachem bam v'yitnem Adonai b'yado Vayakem me'aroer ve'ad boacha minit esrim ir ve'ad avel keramim maka gedola me'od vayikanu b'nei Amon mipnei b'nei Yisrael Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam tzor kol haolamim tzadik b'chol hadorot ha'el ha'ne'eman ha'omer ve'oseh ha'medaber u'mkayem shekol devarav emet v'tzadek ne'eman atahu Adonai Eloheinu v'ne'emanim devaracha v'davar echad midvaracha achor lo yashuv rekam ki hamelech ne'eman v'rachaman atah baruch atah Adonai Ha'el ha'ne'eman b'chol devarav Rachim al Tzion ki hi beit chayenu V'la'aluvat nefesh toshia b'mhera v'yameinu Baruch atah Adonai Mesameach Tzion b'vaneha Samcheinu Adonai Eloheinu B'eliyahu hanavi avdecha U'b'malchut beit aviv meshichecha B'mhera yavo v'yagel libenu Al kiso lo yeshev zar ולא ינחלו עוד אחרים את כבודו, כי בשם קודשך נשבעת לו, שלא יכפה נרו לעולם ועד, ברוך אתה אדוני, מגן דוד. על התורה ועל העבודה ועל הנביאים ועל ועל יום השבת הזה שנתת לנו, אדוני אלוהינו, לקדושה ולמנוחה, לכבוד ולתפארת. על הכל, אדוני אלוהינו, אנחנו מודים לך ומברכים אותך. יתברך שמך בפי כל חי, תמיד לעולם ועד. ברוך אתה אדוני, מקדש השבת.
Yasher Koach to Rachel for chanting the Haftarah, and to Steve for reading Torah, to Howie for leading us in Shacharit, and in advance to Yasher Koach to Eli for leading us in Musaf. Before Ashrei, I'm going to offer a prayer in honor of our celebration of Pride Shabbat. This is a coming out prayer for LGBTQ people and those who love them, and we will be doing it instead of the blessings we seek. It was written by Yoel Kahn in 1989. O God of truth and justice, the evasions and deceits we practice upon others and ourselves are many. We long only to speak out and to hear the truth, yet time and again, from fear of loss or of hope of gain, from dull habit or from cruel deliberation, we speak half-truths. We twist facts. We are silent when others lie, and we lie to ourselves. Whether we are lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, or questioning, family, or friends, we sometimes feel forced to pretend to be that which we are not, to present ourselves in ways that are not truthful, and sometimes with outright lies. But as we stand before you, our words and our thoughts speed to one who knows them before we utter them. We do not have to tell untruths to you as we are often forced to do in the world. We know we cannot lie in your presence. May our worship help us to practice truth in speech and in thought before you, to ourselves and before one another. And may we finally complete our liberation so that we no longer feel the need to practice evasions and deceits. And let us say Amen. We continue with Ashrei, page 420.
Ashrei Oshrei Veitecha Odi Hallelujah Selah. Tehillah LeDavid Aramim Chalohai HaMelech Baruch Hashem Leolam Va'ed. Gadol Adonai Hu Meod V'Ligdulato Ein Cheker. Hadar Kevod Hodecha B'divrei Nivlotecha Asicha. Zecherav tu Chayabiyu B'tzidkat Chayeranenu. Tov Adonai la kol rachamavo kol maasav. Kevod malchutecha yomeru, Dvuratecha yidaberu. Malchutecha malchut kol amim umem shaltecha b'chol dor v'ador.
Somech Adonai lechol hanoflim v'zokef lechol hanoflim.
Einei kol elecha yisaberu ve'ata noten lachem letochlam eito. Tzadik Adonai b'chol deracha b'chasid b'chol maasav.
Karov Adonai lechol korach lechol asher yikaru lechem.
Ritzon yirei aviyaseh ve'et Shabbatam yishma v'yoshiyim.
Shalom Adonai kol hava v'yeto harishayim yashim.
Tehillat Adonai yedaber pi v'varech kol basar shem kodesh le'olam va'ed. Yahalelu et Shem Adonai, ki niskav shemo levado. Oretz v'shamayim, v'yarem ke'eyamu, tehillah lecho, chasidav, b'nei Yisrael, am kerovo.
We continue individually on page 424. He's more than
Uvnucho yomar Ki lekach tov natati lachem torati al tazovu Eitz chayim hi Machazikim ba V'tomchecha Neusha
Shabbat Shalom. Today is Congregation Agudat Achim's Pride Shabbat, on which we honor and celebrate our faith that each of us and all of us are created B'Tselem Elohim in the image of God. We actively and wholeheartedly welcome people of all sexual orientations and gender identities to become involved in the religious, social, and educational life of our congregation. We, each of us, is responsible for that attitude of welcoming. It's not enough to say on our website, on our promotional materials, it's not enough to say that our congregation is welcoming. That is only true if each of us acts in a welcoming way. Not only with respect to the queer community, but also toward everyone. We must grow our inner capacity for love to be larger than our outer capacity. We must plumb the depths of our well of love, the well of love which is inside each of us and which connects to that divine source of love. Sometimes the inside of a space is bigger than the outside. For those people who are aware of the writings of C.S. Lewis, this is a theme that pervades his Christian writings, but it's also a theme which is deeply embedded in the Jewish tradition. The inside is sometimes bigger than the outside. What do I mean? Our tradition teaches us that every worshiper in the Beit HaMikdash, in the temple in Jerusalem, was able to find space to bow completely flat, to go full prostration, as we talked about earlier today when we said the Aleinu prayer, when the Kohen Gadol came out of the temple and said the word Adonai and pronounced the name of God, and everybody fell on their faces, even though when they were all standing up, they were packed in to the courtyard of the temple like sardines, with no space in between people. somehow when it came time for them all to lie on their faces, there was enough room for that. The inside of the space was larger than the outside. Other examples of this phenomenon are mentioned in the Midrash. The primordial waters, which despite taking up all the space in the universe, were then able to be gathered so that dry land could be seen. Moshe, holding seemingly an impossible amount of ash in his fist to throw to begin the plague of boils. And all of the worshipers in the world fitting into a supernaturally expanded Jerusalem in order to pray in an imagined future. Our parashat Chukat, also contains one of these moments when the inside is bigger than the outside. Numbers chapter 20, verse 10 begins, Vayakilu Moshe ve'Aaron et hakahal el pnei hasala. Moshe and Aaron assembled the congregation in front of the rock. How could it be that all of the people were able to gather next to this rock? There were 600,000 men, presumably 600,000 women, and that's just the people between the age of 20 and 60. Then there was also all of the kids, the elderly. It's a huge congregation. Of course, most of the older folks had died out in the 40 years in the desert. But even if just you imagine that it's all young people, it's a lot of people. How could they all be next to one rock? Says the Midrash, Ela ze echad min hamekomot shechezik mu'at et hamarbe. This is one of the places, one of the times, where the small contains the multitude, where the inside is bigger than the outside. How is it that all the thousands of the Jewish people could find themselves so close to the relatively small rock to immediately slake their thirst from the water that poured out? This was one of the miraculous moments when, as my friend Avigail Halpern teaches, when space contracts so that more needs can be met. Chana Kapnick Ashar, in teaching this midrash, invites us to focus on the way that this text calls us toward moments of abundance rather than moments of scarcity. The worshipers in the temple could stretch out their bodies and speak their prayers in the fullness of the space that they needed without worry of kicking the person behind them or of having their private petition overheard. And we are invited to imagine the scene of water flowing from the rock as one where everyone could immediately receive satiation without struggling with their peers to reach a limited stream of water. Earlier this week in my Tuesday afternoon class at 12:30, my Parshat HaShavua class, I learned with a group of our congregants a teaching by Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, in which he suggests that the cessation of water following the death of Miriam has more to do with a psychological understanding of Moshe and Moshe's grief than it has to do with a supernatural well of water that disappeared when Miriam died. Of course, there is a midrash that imagines that the reason why the people complained of lack of water immediately following the death of Miriam is that there was a well that followed Miriam around in the desert, and on her death the well disappeared. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs wrote, "There is another way of reading the passage, naturally and psychologically. The connection between Miriam's death and the events that followed had less to do with a miraculous well and more to do with Moshe's response to the complaints of the Israelites. This was the first trial he had to face as a leader of the people without the presence of his sister. Let us recall who Miriam was for Moses. She was his eldest sister, his oldest sibling. She had watched over his fate as he floated down the Nile in a pitched basket. She had the presence of mind and the audacity to speak to Pharaoh's daughter and to arrange for the child to be nursed by an Israelite woman, that is, by Moshe's own mother, Yocheved. Without Miriam, Moses would have grown up not knowing who he was and to which people he belonged. Grief can sometimes make us feel that our resources have dried up, that we are hollow inside, that we have nothing inside us. Certainly not more on the inside than on the outside. Grief can be expressed through sadness, through hopelessness, through isolation, through anger, as we see Moshe's example of striking the rock in anger as a response to his grief of the death of his sister, who he did not have a chance to truly mourn. These feelings, hopelessness, anger, isolation, sadness, far from creating abundance, make us feel small. This can also be the reaction, the feeling of community members who experience a lack of welcoming. It can be the first reaction of ourselves upon understanding that our family members are not who we thought that they were. There is some grief in letting go of some identities in order to be able to take on new identities. And there is a danger of that we as a community could cause hopelessness, isolation, grief, anger, sadness as a result of our being unwelcoming, both as a community and as a society. This kind of grief around exclusion of the queer community or of others on the margins of our communal life is something that I encounter many times in my pastoral work with the congregation. People come to me and they say, I did not feel welcomed when I came here. I did not feel welcomed when I said I was feeling lonely. I did not feel welcomed when I brought my non-Jewish spouse. I did not feel welcomed by a community that didn't know how to share the capacity for welcoming. It is each of our responsibility, the responsibility of the whole community and the responsibility of each member of the community, to, like Miriam, try to find that well, that abundant resource flowing from the divine source of water, which is life, from the divine source of life, and to channel divine love through ourselves and into the world. Then we will together create a world of abundance, a world of connection, a world of light, a world of love, a world where the inside is greater than the outside. I'm going to close with a blessing for pride. Mikor HaChaim, source of life. You have blessed each of us with your spirit. In your wisdom, you have made each of us a unique treasure. Mayan Chayenu, wellspring of our lives. Cause us to flow with courage, with strength and compassion, to live our stories openly, proudly, and joyfully. Shekhinah shel ahava, presence of love. You embrace us with your love. May we embrace ourselves, our partners, our lovers, our friends, our children, our dear ones, with the power of your ahava rabbah, your unending, boundless love. Ruach hashalom, spirit of peace and wholeness, open our eyes to the gifts and blessings we offer and receive from each other. Open our hearts to welcome each other fully and truly. Open our hands to embrace, to support, to lift each other. Bigila, birina, uvreyut, with joy, with song, and with deep friendship. Today, as we celebrate renewal, as we celebrate pride, as we celebrate community, let us walk together with strength, with compassion, and with love. Nivarech et me'ayan chayenu asher techadesh u'tesameach otanu. We bless you, wellspring of our lives. May you fill us with joy and sanctity. Amen. Shabbat Shalom. We continue with Chatzi Kaddish. For Musaf, we rise, page 428, following Chatzi Kaddish. Eli will begin the Amidah together with us on page 430 and 432, and then we will continue with the individual whispered Amidah, page 434 through page 441. We rise now for the Musaf for the Kaddish before Musaf service, page 428.
Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah.
Amen.
Ve'amad yivrach yirtei v'yamlich malchutei. V'chayechonu v'yomechon u'chayei d'chol Beit Yisrael. Bagala u'vizman kariv imeru. Yeshmei Rabbah mevarach le'alam le'almei almaya Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yinaseh v'yithadar v'yithalev v'yithalal Shmei Kedusha Le'ela min kol berchata v'shirata Tush bechata v'nechemata damiram be'alma Nimeru. Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohei Avotenu Elohei Abraham, Elohei Yitzchak, Elohei Yaakov Elohei Sarah,
Yachsar Fi Kodesh Amakashim Shimcha Kodesh Kakatibin
Naritzcha v'nakdishcha kasod siach sarfei kodesh hamagdishim shimcha ba'kodesh kakatuv al yad neviyecha v'kara zel ze ve'amar Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh Adonai Tzivot Melech haaretz kevodo Kevodo malei olam Mishar tav sholim ze lazeh Ayeh mikam kevodo Lumatam baruch yomeru Baruch kavod Adonai Mimkomo yifein rachamim Ve'achon am hamachadim shemo Erev avoker v'chol yom tamim Pa'amayim be'ahava shema omrim Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad Hu Eloheinu Hu Avinu Hu Malkeinu Hu Moshienu Behu Yashmienu Berachamav Sheni Li'enei Kol Chai Behu Yashmienu Berachamav Sheni Li'enei Kol Chai Liot Lachem Lohim Ani Adonai Elohim U'v'divrei kodechecha katuv le'mor Imo Adonai ve'olam Elohai Tzion Ledor vador Hallelujah Ledor vador nagid godlecha U'netzach netzachim kedushatcha nakdish V'shikchacha Eloheinu mipinu lo yamush le'olam va'ed Ki al melech gadol v'kadosh ata Baruch ata Adonai Ha'el HaKadosh
If you haven't completed your individual whispered Amidah, please continue. We join together for Kaddish Aleim, page 506.
יתגדל ויקדש שמי רבה.
Amen.
ועמד יברח ירתה וימליך מלכותי בחי יחונו ומחונו חיי לכל בית ישראל בעגלה בזמן קרוב וימרו.
Amen. Yeshmei Rabba Mevarach, Le'alam Lalmei Amaya Yitbarach.
יתברך וישתבח ויפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי לקודשה.
Prichum.
לילה מן כל ברכתה בשירתה תשבחתה ונחמתה דמירן ועלמה וימרו.
Amen.
כי קבל צודקון ובמחון לכל ישראל קדם ובהון דיבישמע וימרו.
Amen.
יהי שלום הרבה מן שמיים וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל וימרו.
Amen.
עושה שלום במרומיו הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל וימרו.
Amen. Shabbat Shalom and welcome to Congregation Agudat Achim's in-person and live stream Shabbat morning service. A Yasher Koach to Eli for leading us in Musaf and to everybody who participated in our service today. And a particular happy pride. Congregation wishes to celebrate with Eric Woods, Molly Gavins, Yafa Lone, Karen Hausler, Logan Shapiro, Robert Schliffstein, and Vicky Gold on the occasions of their birthdays, which are this week. Mazel Tov. And we would also like to celebrate with Ketty Luz and Bas Koravar and Barry and Mark Handelman, and Harriet and Howard Goldstein, who are all this week celebrating their anniversaries. Mazel Tov to all of our members of our community who are celebrating joyous occasions. And if you have a joyous occasion that you're celebrating, please make sure to share it with us so that we can celebrate together. Next Shabbat, at Kabbalat Shabbat on 5:30, we are celebrating all of our high school graduates. So please do come and celebrate. We'll be in person in the parking lot and on Zoom. Please do come and celebrate with them and with us as we honor the achievement of a particularly challenging last year and a half of high school, and also on the successful completion of years of study and their next plans and where they're going in the future. That will be a really lovely opportunity. I now invite you to rise for Aleinu, page 510.
Aleinu
Leshabeach Adon Hakol, Ateilu Ra'yot Zebreshit, Shalom Asani V'yei Haratzot, V'lo Samanu Mishpechot Adama, Shalom Samchakenu Kahem, V'gor Aleinu Kechol Hamona, Anachnu Korim, Umishtachafim U'odim, Lifnei Melech, Malchei Hamachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Shmonotei Shamayim V'yosei Haaretz, U'moshav Yikaro B'Shamayim Imal, U'shchinatu Zo, V'govei Meromim, U'Eloheinu Einod, Hem Elokeinu Efesulato, Kakatu B'Torato, V'yadata Yom V'hashivota Elevavecha, Ki Adonai Hu Elohim, V'ashamayim imam, Ve'al haaretz mitachat, Einod, Akin nekabel echadon,
Kakatu b'toratecha Adonai imlach le'olam va'ed.
V'nemar
V'haya Adonai le'melech
Our congregation honors the following individuals who have gone to their eternal rest: Lois Abramson, Gerald Garber, Dorothy Kaplan, Henry Burkov, Hannah Naparstek, James Weil, Kira Kirga, Edith Berry, and Jonah Katz. In solemn testimonies to the unbroken chain of faith which links one generation of the house of Israel to the next, those who mourn and those who are observing Yartzeit now rise to magnify and sanctify God's name with the words of Kaddish Avelim, Mourner's Kaddish, page 512. Yitzgadal, Vit Kadash, Shemei Rabbah, Ve'alma Divra Kirtei, Ve'amlich Malchutei, Chayechon Uvyomechon Uvchayei Dechol Beit Yisrael, V'agala Uvizman Kariv V'imru Amen. Yehei Shmei Rabbah Mevarach Le'alam Olamei Almaya. Yitbarach V'yishtabach V'yitpa'ar V'yitromam V'yitnaseh V'yitadar V'yitaleh V'yitalal Shmei Dekudesha Brichu. Leila min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechmata damiran be'alma v'imru amen. Yehi shlama rabba min shemaya v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom imrama hu yaseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Going to invite Jackie to offer some announcements on behalf of the congregation's Board of Trustees.
Well, for the first time in a really long time, we don't have any special events coming up, but we do still have special things happening. We have lots of ongoing events. Rabbi's Parshat HaShiva class every Tuesday at 12:30. And that's on Zoom. And we have our beginner and intermediate Hebrew classes on, what day of the week are those?
Tuesday.
Tuesdays also. Those are in the evening at 6 p.m. So that's an ongoing thing. If you'd like to join in with that, you can contact Sipora Harris. And Jonathan Wiles' A Tanakh Tour de Force, Exploring Literary Devices and Purposeful Patterns in the Hebrew Bible. That continues next week on Wednesday. And on Wednesday, that's at 1 p.m. On Wednesdays at 10 a.m. is the Congregation Agudat Achim Healthy Living Group. So there's still lots of stuff going on. And I think that's it. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. We spent a lot of time this morning talking about pride, and I invited us to also think about the importance of Juneteenth at the very beginning of the service. For those of you who were here, I would be remiss to not also wish those members of our congregation who are fathers a happy Father's Day. For tomorrow is Father's Day. So happy Father's Day, and we'll close our service with Adon Olam, page 514.
Adon Olam Asher Malach
B'terem kol Yitzir Nivra Le'ei Nasa B'chefzo Kol Melech Shemo Nikra V'yacharei Kilchot HaKol Levado Yimoch Nora V'hu Haya V'hu Olech V'hu Yeh V'tifara V'hu Echad B'Yishei V'hashiro V'hachmira V'Reshit V'Tachlit V'Ha'ot V'Hamisra V'hu Eli V'Hai Goali V'Tzor Chavli V'Yetzara V'Hu Nisi Umanosli Menat Kosi V'Yom Ekra B'Yado
of Kid
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom. Yasher Koach, Ali.